Hello, everyone. Welcome. This is Ivory Davis, Louisiana Cannabis Nurse Navigator, coming back to you. If you haven't caught the part one of this series, please look at part one of the series because there we were talking about the international, what's going on with cannabis policy on the international level. And now we will talk about cannabis policy that's going on a little bit in Washington, D.C. So I'm so glad to have you guys come back on and we will finish this conversation. So without further ado, we will get to the presentation. I think I'm sharing my screen here. Okay. Oops. I did my presentation in Canva. I don't know why, but I did. And so anyway, I converted it to PowerPoint. So if some of the things look off or misscrewed, forgive me. Um, what was the other thing I wanted to say? We are talking about finishing up the conversation on following the politics. So in part one, we talked about the critical 80 days of action on the road to federal decriminalization of marijuana. And so we pretty much talked about it in part one on the international level. Part two, now we're going to talk about it a little bit more on what's going on in DC. And we'll try to talk about some of the similarities again and some of the parallels and things of that things of that nature, and some of the latest politics that's evolving around cannabis policy. Okay, so we'll get off into it. Again, my name is Ivory Davis, also known as Louisiana Cannabis Nurse Navigator. I am a registered nurse here in Louisiana. My specialty of practice is workers' comp nurse case management. Workers' comp pretty much was the opening for me to explore into the cannabis space. In part because I deal with patients a lot that I knew eventually that cannabis will eventually be a good therapy for them. Right now, medical cannabis is not is not approved for workers' comp, but I anticipate that will eventually change. The more things are evolving, especially with Louisiana. Louisiana has a lot going on with cannabis, and I look for the cannabis space to evolve, including my area of practice, which is dealing with injured workers and assisting them to try to return to the workforce. Also, I am undergoing training to be not to be one, but just training as a contract tracer. And I'm undergoing the training just to learn more. And the reason why I'm trying to learn more is, of course, just as a concerned citizen, for one, but for two, because I see that COVID has a lot of similarities, or it intersects a lot with cannabis. And actually, there's research being done now to promising research that's being done to study the effectiveness of cannabis actually being a treatment for COVID. So that's why that's one of the things that's on my radar. So let's get off on into it. Part one, we left off on talking about the United Nations vote, the vote on international cannabis policy and whether to deschedule cannabis. That vote will take place 1 month after the U.S. election. So that timing is just interesting. The vote before the UN is scheduled to take place in December. That's if it's not postponed again. And being that it's a few short months away, and we don't even really quite know what the U.S. position. The U.S. really hasn't told us what the position is yet. Their position or our position is on this vote. However, if we listen at some of the words coming out of Washington, unfortunately, and I hope I'm wrong, we probably got a good guesstimation on what the U.S. position would be. But let's just go ahead and get into it. When I say 80 days of action, I'm pretty much talking about, and excuse me, I don't know where this fly coming from. we're pretty much talking about what can we do before the election to garner support for December's vote, right? So as cannabis nurses, as nurses in general, because we are advocates, and as just general cannabis advocates, we need to be asking ourselves the question, okay, we have a big cannabis vote in December, but the election is in November. So will our politicians really be? They really won't be in a position to where we could, really force them to consider or force them to listen to the calls for descheduling, because the vote would have already taken place for the U.S. election 1 month prior. So because of that, I think that there's a lot of action. If you're paying attention, there's a lot of action going on in DC right now on trying to push this really push for some type of movement in the cannabis space. And if you're not paying attention, you'll miss it. Which is what brings me to the next point: is where are you getting your cannabis news? Because for the most part, anything dealing with cannabis policy per se, I'm not really seeing that in the mainstream news. Like, I'm not seeing that on CBC, NBC, CNN, and all of the other. I'm not really seeing that. I'm getting updates from just beat reporters who their beat is cannabis, international health, things of that nature. They're following it. So I follow them to get the latest and the greatest, but pretty much just about cannabis in general, or cannabis policy in general. You're not going to hear that on mainstream. So I talk about this a little bit more in part one. So, and I talk about, what sources and who I'm following to get the latest and greatest. So hop over there and listen to that. Okay. So we'll pick up from May 2020. Well, we'll pick up in May. I'm sorry, in March 2020. As we all know, March 2020, the world turned on its head with COVID-19. And as a result of that, businesses from everywhere have been impacted by COVID-19. And that caused, as Congress is considering different relief packages, due to COVID and cannabis issues, it caused a bipartisan coalition of 34 out of 50, okay? 34 state attorney generals to come together and write to Congress urging them, let me move my screen up here, urging them to include provisions for cannabis banking in basically the next stimulus package. That's a huge mandate to say that 34 out of 50 people agreed on this one thing. And that brings me to the point to where cannabis really is a bipartisan issue. It is strongly a bipartisan issue, and we're seeing that here, to where 34 state attorney generals came together to ask Congress to do that. So actually, in their statement, they include a statement that says, in advancing the legislative goals, I can't see my screen. The legislative goals, Congress is not necessarily endorsing any state or territory's legalization of marijuana-related transactions. Similarly, the enactment of the Safe Banking Act is not a call for the legalization of marijuana or retail marijuana in those jurisdictions. So pretty much what they're saying is, we're asking you to help these cannabis-related businesses with their banking and transaction, but don't confuse that or conflate that with, we are asking that this act is asking you to legalize marijuana. We don't want you guys to get confused on that. We're just asking for banking provisions to help those that are in the cannabis business, but we don't want you to think that that has anything to do with legislation for descheduling, I guess, of cannabis. So I think that was an important distinction from these 34 senators, because they probably felt as though that distinction was probably needed in order to shore up support for this Safe Banking Act. So I believe that was in May of this year, the HEROES Act. passed by the U.S. House with funding for the cannabis banking as requested by the state attorney generals. That was in May. Still no movement. It's August now, and as far as I know, I don't think that the Heroes Act has been brought to the floor of the Senate, and definitely not voted on by the Senate. Republican support Senate report for not necessarily the Heroes Act, but for the safe banking provision. From my research, I've come across two that have been vocal that they support per se safe cannabis banking. Senator Michael Capino, I'm sure I'm mispronouncing his name. He's a Idaho senator from Idaho. He is, and who's also the Senate banking chair. He held actually a historical cannabis banking hearing last year, and he's in favor of cannabis banking, but not necessarily, I guess, included in this Heroes Act bill. So that's an important distinction. The other Republican senator is, of course, Republican Senator Cory Gardner. He's from the great state of Colorado, so as you can imagine, he is a champion for marijuana. As far as non-support for the Heroes Act, which includes safe cannabis banking, the White House opposes the bill. However, it's not clear per se if their opposition is because of the cannabis banking provision solely, or in conjunction. I would probably say we know that they don't agree with it, and I'll show you screenshots of that in a minute. But I don't know if that's the main sticking point as to why we can't get legislation. But just know that cannabis is in the center of the conversation about it. Senator McConnell, who is the Senate leader, he said that he called the bill a totally unserious effort and sharply criticized the cannabis banking provision. He said that the word cannabis appears in the bill 68 times. And that's true, because I actually went to the bill and searched it to see, and it is referenced in the bill 68 times. So we know he's been clear. I'm not in favor of the cannabis banking provision, which is probably why the cannabis banking provision, or the Heroes Act for that matter, hasn't been brought to the floor of the Senate. Because look at what the Senate Republican leader is being vocal about. So in July of 2020, Senator McConnell, or the Senate leadership, unveiled their latest round of coronavirus relief legislation, and it did not include Safe Banking Act provisions. So that tells us that the Safe Banking Act provision is a huge sticking point, because they unveiled a different, I guess, a 2.0 Heroes Act than what was passed by the House. But it was noted that theirs did not include safe banking, cannabis banking provisions. So that's interesting. So a reporter asked House Speaker Pelosi, pretty much why is cannabis banking even included in the Heroes Act? Why is it included, or whatever, and question the relevance of it being included. And Pelosi said, and I quote, "I don't agree with you that cannabis is not related to this." She said, "This is a therapy that has proven successful." So she said that she took issue with the suggestion that there wasn't a role for marijuana reform amidst this pandemic, which that's very interesting because to say we in the middle of a pandemic, which you would put on probably on a scale to 1 to 10, you would put that way up there as number one. And then it's like cannabis is kind of looping around Washington in the middle of this. So I just think that that's very interesting, and that's why I followed it to say, okay, I understand that the bipartisan group of state attorney generals wrote a letter in support of this or asking for this, but just to, and that's one thing to honor, but it just feels like there's also a situation where marijuana reform is being interweaved some kind of way or another into this pandemic. So that's just really something that I'm watching. So on July the 31st, so take note of that date, on July the 31st, Republican leader Kevin McCartney said that that Pelosi just doubled down on her $3 trillion cannabis legislation, falsely claiming that it is proven therapy for coronavirus. Now, in the previous slide, when I showed you, I quoted, which is why I'm quoting all this stuff. I think her quote said that it's proven therapy. I don't think it actually said coronavirus, but I can see where it could easily be, where you could easily say, well, the topic is coronavirus. So she's saying that cannabis has been a proven therapy for coronavirus. Okay, so it's just 6 in one hand, half a dozen in the other hand. But he wrote that on Twitter on July the 31st. And then the other thing that's written in the statement is that he says she doubled down on her $3 trillion cannabis legislation. Well, the $3 trillion HEROES Act is not all cannabis legislation. So if you read this, it looks as if, $3 trillion, because I was actually following it like, whoa, is it $3 trillion that's included? No, I think the bill itself is $3 trillion. And cannabis legislation is a piece of that bill. So that's kind of a little misleading. So he posted that was posted on Twitter on July the 31st. So 6 days later, there was a response. To me, there was a response. You guys tell me if this was a response or not. No, it didn't come from Nancy Pelosi responding back to Mr. McCartney or anything like that, or any other political figure, but there was a response on the subject of cannabis and research. And that response came from the American Heart Association. And they said that I didn't necessarily agree with the premise for their call for descheduling, but nevertheless, I agree with the descheduling. But I think their article quoted something as if to say they were calling for it because cannabis affects the heart or something of that nature. So 1 second, I had to send a message. So they were calling for it because cannabis affects the heart. So that's their purpose for saying that they're coming out to suggest that the DEA remove cannabis from Schedule 1 so that it may be researched or studied by scientists. Let me know if it's just me, but I feel like the timing of that coming out is very, I don't want to say political, but political, And even though I support them coming out, because as many people as we can come out that can come out to say, well, we support research, that's wonderful. But I do feel like it was a response to Mr. McCartney's statement, but that's just my own personal conclusion. Also with the timing, previously, the American Nursing Association, American Medical Association, AARP, previously, a while back, maybe over a year ago, came out in support of research. But I don't recall American Heart Association coming out at that time for calling for research. But all of a sudden now, in the middle of a pandemic and in the middle of arguing on this pandemic, boop, they came out. So I just thought that timing was interesting. So fast forward from there, after we've had that big debate, you know, you got this debate brewing with the um, Heroes Act. And in the Heroes Act, we're seeing firsthand that cannabis is in the middle of that. Then you got the American Heart Association that has come out and gotten into the fold. And I don't have it on this screen, but I should have maybe added it. But also there's research from a Canadian researchers too that, and I think that came out maybe sometime in July from these Canadian researchers saying that they're seeing promising data from cannabis as it relates to COVID. So that's just a lot of movement going on, you know, with that, with the research factor, with the Heroes Act, that includes the banking, with the bipartisan 34 attorney generals coming out, all of that in the middle of a pandemic. So as we move fast forward, last week a shoe dropped. And California Senator Kamala Harris was announced as the Democratic VP nominee. Now, the confetti that's listed on your screen is not per se in support or against Senator Harris. So let me just be clear about that. But the confetti is pretty much just trying to allude to the fact that it was so much topsy-turvy talk going on that took up the news cycle for like 3 or 4 days. And you will have to wonder why, because I don't think that any of the other candidates would have produced such a response. But I think the reason why hers produced such a response is because of her. She was an interesting pick for multiple reasons, and I can do a whole nother video on that. But also, it definitely brought to the table conversation on cannabis. Now, you already got this whole other conversation with these people with the American Heart Association and the Heroes Act that include all of that. But then when you add this piece in it, it kind of bring cannabis even more up to the table, really, when you think about it. And I'm going to show you why. Team Trump's response to Kamala Harris being selected as the VP nominee. And what are they responding? What are they saying? You're seeing all kind of articles and things about marijuana. So Vice President Pence slams marijuana as part of the banking provision in the Democrats' COVID bill. Kellyanne Conway, when asked about Senator Harris, she said, quote, "She put people away from marijuana use, and then she gave plea deals to defendants who had done far worse than marijuana use. She's going to be expected to answer for that." I wish I had the video clip, because hearing it makes it gives you it makes it more vivid when you hear it. But pretty much that's what she said. And I thought that was interesting when she said she's going to be expected to answer for that. And just putting on my political hat, I almost think that that's probably why she was picked for this role, because I don't think that it's accidental that cannabis is being thrust into this debate, because clearly they knew Mr. Joe Biden knew that when he selected Senator Harris, that cannabis and marijuana, or whatever you want to call it, was going to be the center of debate. So to me, it feels like they're welcoming that debate. And so for Kellyanne to say she's going to have to answer to that, to me, I'm like, I think she probably won't. I think that's what they're wanting. I would think they want to answer to it, because they have to know that that's going to be the center of the conversation. So for me, as a cannabis nurse advocate, I like this conversation. I don't care which side of the fence you're on. I like the fact that cannabis is everywhere in the conversation. You know what I'm saying? And notice these sources. Kellyanne's source, I mean, this was from Recount. I don't even know who Recount is, but it's not one of your mainstream media outlets. Marijuana Moment is not one of your main, I mean, they're mainstream when it comes to people in the cannabis space, but they're not mainstream as far as media. So people are talking about it, but they're not talking about it on your regular TV station. Rudy Giuliani came out talking about he accuses Senator Harris of smoking weed while prosecuting marijuana smokers. And then a reporter asked President Trump about it, and um, he said that she lied about smoking cannabis while listening to Snoop Dogg. So you see all of this conversation going on around cannabis just from Senator Harris being picked as the VP nominee for the Democratic Party. I just think that that's interesting. I think that I like the fact that marijuana is being discussed or cannabis is being discussed. I hate that it's not being discussed where in traditional settings, but it's definitely showing that it's a lot of movement and discussion coming about. And actually, I think 3 days, if I'm not mistaken, boom, cannabis hits the mainstream media. Like finally, all these other sources were talking about it, and now it hits mainstream because then guess what happens? The ACLU, NAACP, and other groups put out a very detailed position letter pushing Congress not only to pass marijuana legislation, but they told them they want it passed by next month. So again, this is what they say. A coalition of major civil rights organizations is urging congressional leadership to hold a House floor vote on congressional marijuana legalization by the end of next month. I just find that interesting because I think that the M.O.R.E Act, if I'm not mistaken, which is the comprehensive bill that they're talking about, I want to say that passed the Judiciary Committee last November. So it's like I find it interesting that 3 days after this lady is picked, that they are seizing on the moment and saying we want this bill passed and we want it passed within the next month. They said that in the face of an evolving COVID-10 pandemic and a growing national dialogue on unjust law enforcement practices, marijuana reform is a modest first step at chipping away at the war on drugs. And they go on and on and on. And then they specifically at this point bring up the M.O.R.E Act. So they telling us this is what we want you to bring to the table. So it makes you wonder, why the urgency? If this thing was passed by the Judiciary Committee back in November of last year, why 3 days after this lady is announced as the VP pick, that this letter comes out, and not only are they saying that they want it, but they're saying they want it now. And I apologize for that screen. That's one of the things that changed when I converted it. So my thoughts on this, which I guess I pretty much already have been alluding to, is that I don't think it's by accident that this lady being chosen. I hate to say this lady because that sounds disrespectful, but I don't think it's by accident that Senator Harris being chosen as the VP nominee is pushing the envelope and advancing the conversation on cannabis. And I can appreciate that because it brings me to think that these next 80 days are critical. And I'm saying next 80 days because after 80 days, after November the 3rd, we don't know if she's going to still be in that seat to where this conversation will continue. Because when you think about the 4 candidates, if you will, if that's the correct terminology, but you have President Trump, who's been vocal on he's not in favor of descheduling. Pence, I just showed you what he said. So we know that he's been vocal. He's not in favor of descheduling. Biden, just a few weeks ago, Biden released his his plan or his policy, his plan for policy, and it did not include descheduling. But then he picked Kamala, I'm sorry, I'm mispronouncing her name, Kamala Harris, Senator Harris. Senator Harris is the lead author for, or the lead sponsor for the M.O.R.E Act. So I just feel like when you in this cannabis space, it just creates an opportunity. It creates an opportunity, and I think it's interesting that people evolve. I've been thinking about that. I've evolved. If somebody would have asked me 10 years into my nursing career, or even 10 years ago, my position that I have now on cannabis and descheduling and legalization is not the same position that I had 10 years ago. And I can just go on and on and on about, how the African American community, especially African American professional communities, such as myself, or talking with other cannabis nurses of color, our walk in this cannabis life is not the same. In this cannabis space is not the same as our counterparts. We have seen our communities ravaged by the war on drugs. So we are late getting to the table. And I'm not giving Senator Harris a pass, but I have begun to try to understand, as I think about me in this space, I think about her in this space as well. And my personal thought is we have to allow people to evolve. And I know it's a lot going on with her in her record. And I think that her record she does need to answer for her record. However, as a cannabis nurse, advocate, and as just an advocate in this cannabis space, I would meet her where she is and take her on her own, and take her for her word when she says that she has evolved in the cannabis arena, because she's the only one now out of the four that we even have a chance at trying to get somewhere. And this is not about voting for her or voting for the Democratic ticket. So let me give that disclaimer. I'm not doing positions. I don't want people to think that I'm trying to sway you on. That's not what this is. What this is about is talking about how one person who is now saying that they are a cannabis advocate, now being thrust, they are by extension causing the conversation on cannabis to be thrust into mainstream media. And as a cannabis advocate, I can appreciate that for now, for this space, because this may change in 80 days after the election. This may no longer be the issue if her ticket doesn't advance to the next step. But what I'm saying is, now I think as cannabis advocates, we need to be using this crucial time period, these 80 days, to our advantage. And being that there's one person at the top that's saying that they're in favor of cannabis, we need to be pushing that as far as we think it can go. And apparently, I don't think that I'm the only one that think like that. My position is, I don't think we need to blow these 80 days or blow this opportunity. It's pretty much what I'm trying to say. You don't have to agree with her. We don't have to agree with her. We don't have to agree with her position or the platform or anything else. But for 80 days, at least, we have somebody that's at the top that's saying that they are cannabis advocate. And if we are cannabis advocates, we need to take advantage of that. So that's why I say 80 days of action, hashtag we want more. That's something that I'm going to be pushing on my social media. We really need to be trying to push this more Act, because we don't know if we're going to have this opportunity again, at least not possibly for 4 years or not, to push this now is the time to really, really push this M.O.R.E Act. So that's why I say watch this space, stay current on the issues. Cannabis is definitely on the ballot. You know, with what has happened in the last 2 weeks, it really just dawned on me. Wow, cannabis is really on the ballot. It's really on the ballot. And when I say ballot, it's not necessarily the ballot in um, um, the ballot in November, the election. It's on the ballot now. It's on the ballot on what we're doing now, from now until November the 3rd. Okay, we need to be pushing and advancing, using this as an opportunity to advance. I can care less on black, white, woman, male, all this other kind of stuff that the media likes to portray in this historic moment. No, this moment is historic because really, when you think about it, I can't really think of I and I can be wrong, and I'm sure you'll let me know if I'm wrong, but I can't even think of anybody that has been on the ticket that has been a proponent or that's saying that they're a proponent of cannabis, Democrat or Republican ticket. So to me, this is history, even if it's only short lived. If it's only 80 days, it's history for cannabis proponents to seize this moment. So I encourage everyone to write, call, email your House of Rep to encourage them to vote to move forward on the M.O.R.E Act. And as we looking into this space to let's keen in on what our elected officials are saying and what they are doing. I think that is very, very important, especially these next few weeks, because you're going to have the the Democratic committee and the Republican committee laying out their platform, and I'm going to be listening. I want to listen to if I hear any signals to one way or another on cannabis policy. That's one of the things that I'm going to be watching. So important dates. I shared these dates and went through them and the significance of them in part one of the presentation. So please go back to part one if you haven't, about upcoming meetings, important dates to jot down. Like I said, go to part one of the video of this presentation to know more about those dates in detail. References. I have a reference list that I've just been compiling to bring this data to you from part one and part two, and it is available upon request. So please email me if you like. I can send you my reference list. It's not quite completed yet, but I'm working on getting it all compiled of everything that I've read to kind of lead me to the thoughts that I've presented to you guys today. Please like, share, follow, subscribe. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Also, I have a YouTube channel, Nurse Ivory, and I have my email listed here as well, cannabis@rosenthalconsultangsolutions.com. And I thank you all, and I look forward to hearing from you guys, and we'll talk again soon.